And we're wrapping up the 19th. I think we're wrapping up. We might have a little bit more than 14 minutes to go. The 19th chapter of the 4th part of Silver on the Tree. The name of the part is Midsummer Tree. The name of the chapter is The Rising. And really, it's the challenge of whether or not Bran belongs in the time that they're in. John Rowlands was foolishly made the judge by the dark, and even more foolishly, they used Rowlands' wife to try to appeal to him, and it definitely pushed him toward the side of the light. So we'll pick up from where we left off. He looked up at the lady. "There's my judgment, then." His voice seemed deliberately rough and rural, as if he were trying to isolate himself. The lady said clearly, "The high magic confirms it, and thanks you, John Rowlands, and the light accepts that this is the law." She turned a little toward the bank of the river, to the churning darkness behind the mist. The brightness seemed to grow around her, and her voice rose. "And the Dark Rider?" The wind was rising, tugging at her long blue robe. Somewhere far off, faint thunder rolled. The Black Rider said in a quiet fury, "It is the law." He came a little way out of his dark refuge and put back his hood, and his blue eyes glinted in the scarred face. "You are a fool, John Rowlands, to choose to destroy your home for the sake of a nameless cause." "For the sake of a boy's life," John Rowlands said. "He was always a fool, always." Bloodwind Rowlands' voice came out of the darkness, strident, stronger than before. It was again the voice of the White Rider, and suddenly, listening, Will knew that he had always heard the likeness of two, but never thought to add them together. He saw from Jane's face that she had, in her mind, the same fearful parallel. The thunder rumbled again, closer. "A soft one, Yin Furma," Bloodwind Rowlands cried. "A shepherd and a harp player. Fool, fool!" And her voice rose into the whine of the rising wind and was carried away into the darkening sky. All around them, the mist was darkening now, and the sky above was solid with clouds so dark, a gray as to be nearly black. But the lady raised her arm and pointed 5 fingers of her hand at Bran, where he stood motionless in his cage of bright mist. There was a hint of music in Will's ears, though he did not know if anyone else heard. And then Bran was standing there clear, with the sword Arias in his hand, and the blade of the sword was flaming with cold blue light. Bran raised Arias in the air like a brand, swelling beyond him and all around. Will felt the company of the light advancing, driving on, and he saw that their boat was moving again, the water lapping past the bow, choppier now, with small waves raised by the rising wind. He knew that the other vessels of the shadowy fleet were moving too, but at the same time the sky was growing darker, darker yet, filled with great billowing clouds. The wind gusted suddenly higher. He saw the lady's robe swirl round her slender form, and Merriman's dark cloak billow out like a spinnaker over the bow. And then, for an instant, all light was blotted out around them, as with a roar, the whirling tornado of the dark rose into the sky, traveling over and before them, circling the horizon to collect its final strength. Only one streak of light still glowed. Standing in the bow of their boat, Bran swept the crystal sword before him in a blue line cutting the air, and the dark mist parted in a ragged widening gap. They saw green fields rising before them, and suddenly they were all standing on a smooth green slope, on grass with the river no more than a distant murmur in their ears. "Stay close, all 6, Merriman said. He led them up the grassy slope. The chain of signs rang musically round Will's neck. He could feel the myriad shadowy forms of the circle all about them, shielding them, pressing them on. John Rowlands moved beside the lady, blank-faced, as if in a trance. Thunder growled overhead. Then the last of the mist blew away, and in the dim light beneath the lowering sky they saw a line of trees before them, a wood of beech trees capping a round chalk hill, and gradually appearing on the slope in front of the wood, a single huge tree. It took shape under their eyes, a shadowy outline, becoming steadily more solid and real. It rose and filled out, and its broad leaves rustled and tossed in the wind. Its trunk was as thick as 10 men. Its branches spread wide as a house. It was an oak tree more vast and ancient than any tree they had ever seen. Overhead, lightning ripped one of the dark clouds, and the thunder came thumping at them like a huge fist. Barney said, whispering, "Silver on the tree?" Bran pointed Arias up into the tree in a sweeping, triumphant gesture. See where the first branch divides there? And through the swaying branches they could see the mistletoe, the strange invading clump of a different green than the green of the oak. The twinning stems of the small leaves growing upon the tree, glimmering a little with a light of their own. Will gazed at the plant and seemed to see it changing, flickering. He blinked in vain to make out something in the middle of the clump. Merriman's dark cloak blew round him in the rising wind. There will be one spray of blossoms only, he said, his deep voice rough with strain, and we shall see each bud break, and when every small bright flower on the spurt is in bloom, when every small bright flower on that spray is in bloom, only then do we cut the spray. Then, and not before and not afterward, but only in that one moment does the great spell have force. And in that moment, too, he who cuts the mistletoe must be kept from attack by the six, each with one of the signs. He turned his deep-shadowed eyes on Will, and Will reached to his neck to take off the gold-linked circle of the signs, but before he could touch them, white lightning suddenly flashed, far closer than before. From the dark cloud base overhead, Will saw Merriman's tall form stiffen, facing the great tree. He too turned, seeking the mistletoe, and saw all at once that a glint of light, fierce as fire, came from the middle of the strange green clump. The moment was coming. The first bud on the spray of mistletoe flowers had broken into bloom, and with it the dark came rising. Will had never, by any enchantment, known what it would be like. Long afterwards, he thought it must have been like what happens to a mind that goes instantly and totally mad. And worse, for here the world went mad. Like a soundless explosion, the immense force of the dark's power rocked everything round him, rocked his senses. He staggered, reaching blindly for support that was not there. The appearances of things ran wild. Black seemed white, green seemed red, all flickering and throbbing, as if the sun had swallowed the earth. A great scarlet tree loomed over him against a sky of livid white. The others of the six, flashing in and out of sight, were like negative images, blurred forms with black teeth and empty white eyes. The endless dull roar of thunder filled his ears and his mind. He felt sick and ill, cold and hot at once, his eyes closing to slits, a constriction growing in his throat. Unable to move any limb, he saw through leaden eyelids that Simon and Jane and Barney had collapsed to the ground, moving with tremendous effort as if held down by weights. They struggled in vain to get up. Darkness loomed over them. Slowly turning his heavy head, Will saw in sick horror that half the sky, half the world behind him was filled with the whirling black tornado of the dark, spinning between cloud and earth, more vast than his senses could comprehend. He saw Bran struggling, holding up a blue streak of flame as if for support. Bright blue, he thought. I've never seen a brighter blue, except the lady's eyes. The lady, where is the lady? And he could not move or to look for her, but crumpled to his knees, while the world wove to and fro in his spinning gaze. It was only by simple accident that his feeble hand hit the circle of signs hanging from his neck. Then all at once he could see clearly, and wonder caught him as he saw. Down across the storming sky, cleaving the monstrous gray-black clouds, came 6 horsemen, riding 3 on either side they came. Silver-gray, glinting figures on horses of the same strange half-color, galloping cloaks flying, with drawn swords in their hands. One of them wore a glinting circlet about his head, but Will could not clearly see his face. "The sleepers ride!" Bran called to him. Will saw him leaning back in an intent curve, staring upward, clear against the green grass with his white hair and blue flaming outflung sword. "The 7 sleepers, changed now to the riders, just as I said they would be." "But still, I remember there was 6 sleepers," Will said softly to Merriman, so softly that he knew Bran could not hear. 6 sleepers, oldest of the old, and once we woke out of their long sleep beside the lake with the golden harp. Merriman neither moved nor spoke, but stood looking at the terrible sky, and as Will gazed up at the wheeling riders of light, a long brightness began to glow in the east, and like a white sun rising, another figure came leaping across the sky, a different rider of a different shape, like no shape ever born on earth. He was a tall man riding a brilliant white gold horse, but his head was horned like the head of a stag, with shining antlers curving out in 7 tines. And as Will gazed, he raised his great head, yellow light flashing from tawny round eyes like the eyes of an owl, and he gave a call that was like the halloo of a huntsman. That was like the halloo a huntsman blows on the horn to call up hounds. And through the sky after him, belling and baying, came following an endless pack of huge ghostly white hounds, red-eared, red-eyed, fearsome creatures running inexorable on a trail no living power could turn. They milled round the feet of the huntsman's horse, high up there in the sky, as he laughed dreadfully over them in delight of the chase. They thronged round the silver-gray horses of the sleepers, waiting restlessly to join their hunt. And then the huntsman, in a wild shout, gave the call to let loose the chase, and he and the ghost-gray swordsman, 7 riders, were leaping through the clouds with the hounds of doom flooding after them, red eyes burning 1,000 throats, giving tongue like the whickering of migrant geese. The wild hunt in full cry against the dark for the last time. The vast storm cone of the dark lashed and thrashed away the sky as if in agony, and its tip seemed to split away. A horrible flailing filled the sky, until, with one last convulsive lunge that seemed to bring half the clouds in the heavens down to earth, the huge tornado-like black pillar rushed away upward, out into nowhere, like with the sleepers and the wild hunt in howling, merciless pursuit. But great Herne the hunter reined in his white gold mare, leaping high in the heavens with the force of her arrested speed, and he turned, seeking through the torn and rushing clouds with his tawny wild eyes. And in sudden new terror, Will saw what he sought, the peak of the dark power that would never flee, the 2 huge figures, indestructible now in their full power, of the black rider and the white rider of the dark, curving out of the sky in a long rushing lunge down to the grassy Chiltern Hill and the enchanted tree. Will heard Simon shout from beside the tree, the first sound any of them, or any one of the 6, had made in all their breathless watching, and he turned back to see flashing on the tree new small brilliant points of light, as more buds on the green patch of mistletoe burst into their magical bloom. His hands went to his neck in the same instant that he heard Merriman's silent cry of command in his mind, and he tore off the circle of signs. High in the sky, the riders, grown now to huge size, came rushing toward the earth. Will shouted to Simon and Barney and Jane, 6 signs shall burn! Take 1 for each and circle the tree! They were at his side, eager, reaching, and in the gold-linked chain, each sign came in turn, easily away from the rest, as the gold seemed to melt and vanish like wax. Simon took the smooth black sign of iron, and rushed with it to the tree to stand against the gnarled, enormous trunk, holding it high in challenge. Jane followed with the gleaming sign of bronze, Barney with the Rowan-born sign of wood. There they stood, brave and quivering, staring terrified at the monstrous riders galloping headlong down from the high clouds, down to consume them. Swiftly Merriman joined them with the brilliant gold sign of fire, Bran holding the crystal sign of light with the sword, to leave Will swinging last of all with his back to the tree, holding up in defiance the glittering black flint sign of stone, and the riders were upon them, with bright lightning and deep thunder that came from no cloud but out of the dark air. Their huge horses reared up, screaming, lashing out with wild, deadly hooves. Herne's great horned figure rode at the dark lords and attacked from above, and the force of all the unseen shades of the circle was holding, barring, wrestling them below, with the lady in as its shining focus. But the strain was near to breaking point, and in a burst of brilliance, the last flower on the mistletoe burst into bloom, and we will pause there.